Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Holly Bertone about autoimmune disease and workplace accommodations to protect the health of vulnerable employees. Holly Bertone, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you so much, John, for having me on, and I look forward to connecting with everyone.
Yeah, it's an awesome opportunity to have the chance to talk with you about issues around autoimmune disease, advocacy and accommodations in the workplace, and finding ways to protect the health of vulnerable employees. This is a particularly relevant and very important topic, really at any time, but particularly right now, given the current health crisis that we're in. And so I really look forward to the insights you're going to be able to share with me throughout the discussion, but also with all the listeners.
And thank you again. And I know, my interview is probably a lot different than the majority of the ones on your podcast. I appreciate the chance to share this advocacy. And like you said, this is a very critical time for this population of vulnerable individuals.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. As we get started, I want to share Holly's bio with the listeners. Holly Bertone is the #1 Amazon.com bestselling author of the book Thriving in the Workplace with Autoimmune Disease, Know Your Rights, Resolve Conflict, and Reduce Stress. The first book ever to educate others on autoimmune disease as a legal disability in the United States workplace. She is a highly sought after speaker and wellness expert and the leading authority on autoimmune disease in workplace. Holly spent the first 10 years of her career in human resources, primarily as a recruiter. After working for the prestigious consulting firm Booz Allen Hamilton, she was invited into federal government service as the chief of staff for one of our nation's top national security offices. From there, she spent 15 years in project management. She is currently the president and CEO of Pink Fortitude LLC and founder of Fortitude Academy and the health and wellness website pinkfortitude.com. As a breast cancer and Hashimoto's survivor, she turned these two significant health challenges into a passion to help transform lives for women with chronic illness. Holly is a project management professional, holds a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University, and is a certified natural health professional. In her free time, she loves to garden and hit flea markets and yard sales. Holly is married to a retired Green Beret, is a stepmother, and lives in Alexandria, Virginia. So again, a really interesting background. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
And I have to say, I love Alexandria. It's such a beautiful city. I've been there several times, as recently as last May, and I always love going to Alexandria. And I also share your affinity for flea markets and yard sales.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'm actually glad the antique stores around here are kind of back opening up a little bit. So, yeah.
Well, good. Anything else you want to share about yourself by way of background and context as we get started in the discussion today?
Oh, sure. So I can just give a brief background with my story. It's one of those where all the worlds kind of collided to arrive to this place. I had in my career 10 years of human resources background and 15 years in project management, and now currently undergoing my 10th year with a chronic illness. I'm actually a breast cancer survivor and Hashimoto's survivor, and how this all kind of happened was back in 2017. I was working at my federal agency. Everything was completely fine. We had a new management team come in at the same time where I had not just a bad flare up, but the fatigue was debilitating. And my health was in crisis mode. My doctors wanted me to come in for IV treatments. And I mean, I was about a step away from a long-term stay in the hospital. So it was pretty severe. And up until that point, my health had been up and down, but manageable. The symptoms have been manageable. My management team had been, very flexible with my hours and everything like that. And I was able to succeed and make it happen. But this new management team wanted nothing to do with me being sick. And they illegally rescinded my already approved FMLA and blocked any way to transfer. So basically, I think they were just trying to clear house. But I was the first one that was targeted. I think partly because I was the weakest link in the office with being so sick. So it was a really tough decision when you live outside of a metropolitan area and you're making six figures, and you're faced with losing half of your family's income overnight. It's a tough it's a tough situation, but my health was paramount and priority to to literally survive at that point. So made the big decision to resign. And I had Pink Fortitude just kind of as a lifestyle hobby blog, but it really gave me the opportunity to advocate for others, because when I researched, there was nothing out there for individuals with an autoimmune disease facing workplace discrimination. There is no kind of education out there. There's a lot on EEOC, there's a lot on autoimmune disease, but nothing that marries the two together. So for the last 3 years now, I've spent just really focused on building the advocacy and working with employees and individuals with autoimmune disease, and so that they know their rights in the workplace, but then decided to grow beyond that and work with employers, because when you work with one person at a time, it's great and it helps that individual. But when you work on the corporate side, to be able to change corporate culture, for this community of individuals has just been an absolute blessing out of the crisis.
Yeah, well, thank you for that background and for your openness and vulnerability and sharing your own struggles. I think that provides really good context for why you do what you do and why it's so important, and why we're really having this discussion today. Uh, so maybe you can help the listeners understand as we jump on into the discussion, um, the particulars of autoimmune disease being covered under Americans with Disabilities, how it's a protected legal disability, and some of those basic kind of terminology issues, and what employers should be like generally aware of.
Oh, sure. So I can go through some facts. There's an estimated 54 million Americans that suffer from autoimmune disease, which is approximately 17% of the population. In the UK, it's a little bit smaller. It's about 6%, and in Canada, about 5%. So a little bit smaller, but still a significant growing population. What's interesting is that in the United States, and this is the statistics I'm going to give are pre-COVID numbers in terms of employment. There were approximately 15, and that's 15 million Americans working a full-time job with an autoimmune disease. And that is the equivalent of New York, LA, and Chicago, the populations of those three cities. So it's pretty significant, when you look at the population. And autoimmune disease, in a nutshell, your immune system, which is supposed to protect you and to, fight off the bad guys and the bad germs from making you sick, right? An autoimmune disease actually attacks your own cells. And so it's kind of a reverse. So instead of protecting you, it attacks you. It affects 2 times more people than cancer, and interestingly occurs in 75 to 80% in women compared to men. And the onset is usually in their 30s to 40s, which are not just, they're childbearing years. They're years that women are growing in their careers. So, a lot of times what happens is that, we'll go to the doctor and say, I'm not feeling well, I'm feeling off, whatever. And a lot of the symptoms mirror many other symptoms. And it's often extremely difficult to get diagnosed. So many individuals get dismissed just because of that. But some of the diseases that you might be familiar with, for example, I have Hashimoto's. There's also Graves', fibromyalgia, lupus, multiple sclerosis, psoriatic arthritis, Crohn's disease, type 1 diabetes. So there's quite a few that you're probably familiar with, even if you aren't familiar with the term autoimmune disease. And the symptoms can vary from disease to disease and person to person. The two major symptoms are fatigue and pain, typically joint pain. And again, everyone's different, every disease is different, but those are the two primarily ones. And when I say fatigue and pain, it's not like, oh, I just didn't get a good night's sleep and I need to drink more coffee, or I just worked out and I'm a little bit sore. When I say fatigue and pain, it's typically debilitating fatigue and pain. And the example that I like to give, because I think everyone can relate to, is remember back in your college days and you were, up all night, pulling an all-nighter for an exam, or maybe up all night partying, and you wake up the next day, right? And you're just like, oh, I feel like a train hit me. This is what it feels like pretty much every single day, only with a full night's sleep. So, that's kind of the difference between, oh, I just feel a little tired, or I'm a little, in a little bit of pain. Oftentimes, migraines come along with this, and frequent migraines, brain fog, memory issues, cognition issues, and even digestive issues and skin issues. And stress is probably the number one cause of flare-ups, because stress exasperates that immune response. And especially when we're talking about a work environment, many work environments are very stressful. So we have those, it's that symbiotic relationship between working with an autoimmune disease, keeping your stress manageable, and fighting those symptoms.
Excellent background. And I learned a few things just then. So hopefully this was informative to the listeners as well. So given the range of the types of different symptoms that can manifest with the autoimmune disease spectrum, what what do employers need to do legally to accommodate employees who have autoimmune disease, and even beyond the legal requirements, what should they do?
Oh, sure. So, autoimmune individuals with autoimmune disease are protected under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that was amended in 2008 and went into effect in 2009, because it covers major bodily functions, which include the endocrine and the immune system. So if you meet the conditions under the law, you are legally protected under the ADA. And if we have anyone that's from Canada or the UK, they have very similar laws as the ADA. They're obviously a little bit different, but very, very similar. So so that is something important to remember. And most individuals with an autoimmune disease don't feel disabled, right? You're walking around, you're struggling on a daily basis, but oftentimes, I think we look at a disability, we think of someone that's blind or in a wheelchair, something that you can see, something that's visible. So part of the education is for individuals with an autoimmune disease to know that you are legally protected under the ADA. And, for employers as well, if the individuals don't know that they're protected, it's kind of hard for the employers to know that they need to extend those protections as well. And, and it's also the double-edged sword, because from HIPAA, you can't exactly ask someone those questions about, oh, hey, do you have an autoimmune disease, or are you sick? But something to think about, if you have an employee that's calling off sick, or has trouble coming in at a certain time, but can really thrive later in the day, or vice versa. Maybe they come in really early and really thrive, but then, get really, really tired at the end of the day. Things like that, additional stress that causes flare up. So these are things to be on the lookout. And I always tell employers, I said, obviously you can't ask specific questions about someone's condition until it's legally documented in the workplace. But you can ask, hey, is everything okay? Is there anything going on? How can we best support you? And those open-ended questions can help to really start those conversations with the employees. And especially now, do you want to get into some of the accommodations and things with kind of the current
Yeah.
environment?
Well, yeah, and let's do that in just a moment.
Oh, okay,
So,
sure.
so I wanted to just respond to what you just said, because I think that's so important, that employers create an environment where employees feel safe to share and to self-declare and divulge that information, because ultimately it's up to the employees to share that, and it's hard for employers to provide the accommodations if they don't know about it. you can look
Exactly.
you can look out for the warning signs, and you can look out, for the types of issues you were just describing, to have the conversations. But if you have a culture where people recognize that my employer, values the health and wellness of the employees, that they want us to be our best selves, that that they're going to protect vulnerable employees' health and such. If that culture is present, then they're going to be much more likely to self-report, to share the types of health challenges that they have, and that only helps employers to be more accommodating, because then they have the information they need to be able to respond.
Right. And oftentimes you'll see, either someone that's, okay, a star employee, or someone with a really stellar history of working hard, getting good reviews, always on time. And then, something happens, right? So they start calling in sick more often. They're not coming in on time. Their performance drops. They're not as, with the cognition issues, maybe they're not as sharp. Obviously it could be a million other things going on in their personal life, but these are some of the warning signs to look out in general, that, hey, something might be going on and it might be health related.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much of what you're describing really relates. It's a bit of a tangent, so I don't want to go down this path specifically. But I've done a lot of work over the last 4 years with autism in the workplace accommodations, and much of what you're describing is almost exactly the same experience I've had in employees that are on the spectrum, navigating the workplace, and employers providing accommodations. And autism is also protected under ADA. And so many employers really have no idea how to do that effectively, how to provide accommodations. And so many employees that do fall on the spectrum never share that information. And so it's like this catch-22. Like you're expected as an employer to accommodate, and if you discriminate based on that factor, you can be held liable. Not to mention just looking out for your employees and treating them well. And so, I mean, really, I think there's this whole range: autoimmune, like we're talking about today, autism, and really a bunch of other health conditions and different characteristics that are protected under ADA, that I think a lot of people don't often think about, because they think about the ramps and the wheelchairs, and they think about those sorts of accessibility issues, but they often don't think about some of these other issues that are less visible.
Right, right. And especially like you said, with, invisible illnesses and invisible disabilities, it's hard to see. You walk around and look completely fine. I mean, I hate to say, the worst compliment that I get is when someone says, well, you look okay, you look fine.
So yeah, let's move into accommodations then. What should employers try to do as they try to protect the health of vulnerable employees?
Oh, sure. So, as we were talking before, 6 months ago, this was a very different conversation. But nowadays, even if autoimmune disease isn't a word that you're familiar with, we often have been hearing immunocompromised or immune compromised as part of our daily lexicon, with the current pandemic situation. And a lot of employers have shifted to individuals working from home. So that's always the first line of a reasonable accommodation in terms of being able to have flexible hours or to work from home. And, if you're ramping back up in terms of bringing people back in the office, those who have an autoimmune disease or immune compromise should be among the last to come back, or even have an extended period where they can work from home. So that's always the number one that I recommend. But even as they're coming back to work, or if your workforce is already fully back into your workplace, things that you can think about are a flexible leave schedule, especially if you're in a metropolitan area, so that the individual isn't commuting during peak hours, if they're on public transportation. Reducing physical exercise, if there's a chance, if they have to stand, to provide a seat or to provide um, different like chairs or a standing workstation where they can stand or sit and adjust as needed as they're having flare-ups throughout the day. Um, Things like the screen guards, the glare guards on the computer screens help, especially with migraines. Heat and cooling are often kind of unusual side effects, but they do exist. So to be able to have a personal heater or cooler nearby, a private place, if there is none, if they don't have an office, a private place to make phone calls to doctors. Oftentimes individuals with a chronic illness have quite a few doctor's appointments, and to schedule the appointments, to be able to maybe take their lunch break and have a telehealth appointment, things like that. And then even for example, individuals with celiac disease, to be able to have their own, if you have an allergen table in the cafeteria, or to provide their own refrigerator so that they don't have the cross contamination that with other people's food that will get them sick, because even breadcrumbs with gluten with celiac disease will make someone very sick. So these are just some. I mean, there's a bunch out there. These are some to think about, as and have those open conversations with individuals, once they are documented, in terms of, how can I best accommodate you so that, you're productive and safe.
Yeah, and I guess one of the questions people might have is why do we really even need to be concerned about this? I mean, there's America's with Disabilities Act that protects employees, but if autoimmune is something that a lot of people never self-report, I can see the thought process going through, executives' minds in the workplace, and I could see many of them thinking, well, if they don't report, like, I don't know what you expect us to do. And in fact, it's probably better and easier if we just don't even know about it, because then we don't have to do accommodations. And if they can't perform the job, then we'll just get someone else. So I think that's a mindset that a lot of people would have. I've certainly seen evidence of that in the past. So beyond the strict legal aspects of ADA, any thoughts on how you could convince leaders within organizations to really take this and protecting the vulnerable employees seriously?
Oh, sure. And I think part of it is just realizing that a legal disability is a legal disability. And it doesn't matter if you're in a wheelchair, or if you're blind, or if you're deaf, or if you have an autoimmune disease, if you have autism, all disabilities fall under those legal guidelines. So they all should be taken as serious as the other. The other thing too is just that from the humanity perspective, it's the right thing to do. But oftentimes these reasonable accommodations for individuals with autoimmune disease don't cost any money, or a few dollars at the most. So in terms of reasonable accommodations, you have an employee that let's go back to celiac. They're scared to death of cross contamination, because it will make them very, very sick. Not anaphylactic like a peanut allergy, but very sick. So just having a dedicated space, or having their own refrigerator, allowing them to eat at their desk, things like that help to eliminate that fear. And especially under the situation now, being able to have those flexible hours, if the individuals are at work, to reduce that time on public transportation, or even if you have a workforce that's working from home and they have to come in, to be able to give them a parking space, which alleviates that stress and that worry and that concern. And it helps to increase productivity. I mean, a happy employee, a protected employee, is typically going to be a lot more productive when they're not worried about their own safety.
Exactly. So I think you're hitting on all the key points here that I really was hoping to tease out. One, there's a legal requirement, right? That we really should do our very best to be proactive about complying with. But two, there's a moral, ethical requirement that we see people within our organizations as human beings, and our job is to help them be their best selves, and which then leads to the third issue, which is the business case. Why is it good business for organizations to provide these accommodations? When you treat people with dignity and respect, and you protect their health, and you provide the accommodations that allow them to ease their fears and anxieties and to be more healthy, then they will be more productive. There will be less absenteeism. There will be better collaborations that happen in the workplace, and that's good for the bottom line. So really, across all three areas, the business case, the moral, ethical requirement, and the legal compliance, it all points to we need to be doing better at providing safe work environments for vulnerable employees. And I'll also just note that in all of the accommodations that you mentioned, you didn't go into kind of the traditional list that we've been hearing during the time of COVID, which obviously those things are important too. If people are immunocompromised, we wear face masks, and we wash our hands, and we clean surfaces, and we social distance, and all that kind of stuff. That's also important, and those are very simple accommodations to provide, simple tasks to perform to keep employees healthy and safe. And like you mentioned, so many of these other accommodations really are pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and don't cost a lot of money, but really can not only help the health and the well-being of our employees, but it will help the bottom line of the company as well.
And the other thing too is sick leave. And again, if you have some type of autoimmune disease, chronic illness, your sick leave is typically going to be a little bit more than the average employee. So, for example, let's say you have an employee with lupus and they're having a flare up. Well, maybe they can work for 3 or 4 hours at home in bed on a laptop and be productive, versus take an entire sick day and not coming in. So, and if you take those hours over time, it really adds up. So, it's also being able to, not just from the productive standpoint, but also have your employees working more hours just because of these accommodations.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Holly, it has been a real pleasure talking with you today, and really picking your brain about what organizations can do to help vulnerable employees. We're about out of time. Before we close, though, I want to give you a chance to share a little bit more with the listeners about how they can get in contact with you, find more about you and your business, and get connected if they need some assistance.
Oh, sure. Thank you. So I actually have several free webinars at fortitude.academy, and also some training courses, both for employers and employees, if you want to take a deeper dive. So that's fortitude.academy. And then, of course, lots of great information on my website at pinkfortitude.com.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking. And I really hope listeners will look into this issue a little bit more, reach out to Holly, get connected. And if you feel like you need more expertise to help your organization be a safer workplace and provide better accommodations, please reach out to Holly. Thank you. I hope everyone stays healthy and safe, and that you find meaning and purpose at work. And I hope you all have a good week.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.